What does it mean when a planet is combust, or Cazimi? Have you ever heard of the Synodic Cycle? Those words might sound mysterious, but they point to one of the most powerful but overlooked techniques in traditional astrology. You see, every planet has its own cycle with the sun. Sometimes it is hidden by the sun's light, sometimes it is burned by its rays, and sometimes it sits in the heart of the sun itself, a place with extraordinary power. In traditional astrology, this solar relationship can completely change how a planet manifests its significance. Today, we're breaking down the system known as solar phase. By the end of this video, you will know exactly how to spot these conditions and what they mean in your birth chart. Hello everyone, my name is Geoffrey Ballinger and I'm a student of traditional astrology. In this lesson, I'm teaming up with Satya Astrology to discuss an additional determining factor in planetary condition, solar phase. Even in the geocentric model of the universe used by the ancients, the importance of the sun is unmistakable. Solar phase, as the name implies, has to do with a planet's position relative to the sun, and how that relationship can strengthen or weaken it. The cycles that depict the relative movement of the sun and the planets are known as Synodic cycles. This comes from the Greek word synodos, meaning encounter. The Synodic cycles, in essence, are the cycles of the sun and the planets encountering each other. We'll start by talking about the most direct of these encounters, the conjunction. Due to its brightness, the sun will obscure any planet that comes too close to it. This is, of course, why we don't see the constellations during the day. The sun's light is just too intense. Any planet, likewise, will become invisible when they grow closer to the sun. Now, the sun is not generally considered a malefic planet in traditional astrology, but its overwhelming heat and brightness can have real consequences for the planets that encounter it. Traditional astrologers explained these effects in two ways. First, the sun is like a king. It's the most important and visible agent in the sky, and any planet in its proximity is simply outshone and overpowered by the diurnal luminary. Second, because the sun is considered to be extremely hot, its intense heat was thought to literally burn the themes and significations of a nearby planet, weakening or destroying them for a period of time. The conjunction with the sun progresses through several phases. When a planet is within 15 degrees of the sun, it enters a condition known as being under the beams, or under the rays. In this state, the planet is considered weak and under stress. This becomes more pronounced the closer it gets to the actual conjunction. If you think about it, a planet can be under the rays as it moves away from the sun after their conjunction, or as it moves toward the actual conjunction, as long as it's within 15 degrees from the sun. Ibn Ezra, an important medieval Jewish astronomer, described this condition vividly. He said that a planet under the rays of the sun is like a person being held in prison. A planet emerging from under the rays of the sun is thought to be in recovery, like someone coming out of a period of illness or convalescence. As the planet moves even closer to the conjunction with the sun, it enters a second, more severe condition known as combustion. The generally accepted orb for combustion is within 8 degrees and 30 minutes of the sun, though this varies from astrologer to astrologer. Abu Mashar used 6 degrees for Jupiter and Saturn, 10 degrees for Mars, and 7 degrees for Mercury and Venus. William Lilly used 8 degrees and 30 minutes, but specified that the combust planet must be in the same sign as the sun. Hellenistic astrologers generally used 9 degrees. What you choose to use is up to you, but all traditional astrologers agree that combustion is a serious debility. The planet is very weak, as if it has been completely overpowered by the sun's rays. This weakness becomes more pronounced the closer it gets to the exact conjunction. Even though a combust planet is weak, it can sometimes manifest its raw impulses in an erratic or irrational way, like a trapped animal acting out of fear. A combust Mars approaching the Sun, for example, could indicate someone who becomes aggressive or goes on the offensive over trivial matters. Combustion can also indicate things that are hidden or concealed, since, after all, the planet is invisible beneath the Sun's light. One important mitigating note: if the planet is essentially dignified, that is, it's in its domicile, exaltation, triplicity, or bound, an ancient astrologer said that it was in its chariot. This protects it from the harmful effects of combustion. Mars in Aries, approaching a conjunction with the Sun, for example, would be shielded from the most damaging effects of the Sun's rays, by the virtue of being in its own sign. The planet's difficult proximity to the Sun doesn't last forever. Once it reaches the exact degree of the Sun, the exact conjunction, it enters a phase known as Cazimi, meaning in the heart of the Sun. Medieval astrologers said that this would occur when the planet was within 17 minutes of the exact conjunction, whereas Hellenistic astrologers would use a wider window of within 1 degree. Cazimi is a very special and powerful condition. It is as if the planet were sitting in the throne of the king, right beside the ruler himself. The planet is therefore able to manifest its power almost as a stand-in king. A planet in Cazimi can exercise a remarkable degree of strength and authority. Now, let's discuss what's probably the best known part of the Synodic Cycle: retrograde motion. You've probably heard of Mercury retrograde. I mean, who hasn't? But the fact is, every traditional planet except the Sun and the Moon experience a retrograde period. During those times, the planet appears to move backward through the signs of the zodiac as viewed from the Earth. In general, retrograde motion signifies delays, reversals, and defiance, especially in the sphere of significance of the planet. These planets can be rebellious and unpredictable. They're also associated with repetition, returning to the same matter multiple times, redoing something, or going through the same experience more than once. When a planet transitions from direct motion into retrograde, it briefly comes to a stop. This is known as a station, specifically the retrograde station. When a planet is retrograde, slows to a stop, and then turns direct, that is called the direct station. Both stations intensify a planet's themes and give it a sharper, more focused quality. When a planet approaches its retrograde station, it seems to speed up in carrying out its significations, as if it's trying to get everything done last minute before things start to go south. A planet that is approaching its direct station, meanwhile, acts as if it knows things are about to get better. It becomes more focused, more purposeful, and more aware of the forward momentum returning. In terms of planetary condition, ancient astrologers preferred the direct station to the retrograde station, but both are intensifying in nature and lend a sense of urgency to the planet's operation. Before we dive into the full explanation of the Synodic Cycle, it helps to understand the Ptolemaic order of the planets. In the traditional model of the universe, the Sun sits at the center of the celestial spheres, with 3 planets above it and 3 planets below. This divides the planets into 2 groups. You have the superior planets above the Sun, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars, and the inferior planets, which are below the Sun, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon. The words superior and inferior here refer only to their position relative to the Sun, not to their importance. This distinction matters because the synodic cycle of the superior planets is significantly different from that of the inferior planets, as we'll see now. The The synodic cycle of a superior planet begins at its conjunction with the Sun, while it's in direct motion. At this point, the planet is very strong, but it quickly moves from Cazimi into combustion. While it's combust, it is weak and excitable, burned by the Sun, and prone to act irrationally. Once the planet exits the combustion zone, it remains under the beams until about 15 degrees from the Sun, still weak but slowly recovering. When it finally clears that 15-degree mark, it makes what is known as its heliacal rising on the eastern horizon. This is the moment it first becomes visible in the morning sky, after a period of invisibility. This is like a rebirth, and the planet is generally very strong at this point. The exact date of heliacal rising can vary based on the inclination of the ecliptic, the observer's latitude, and the planet's brightness. So astrology software can be helpful to calculate this moment precisely. From there, the planet enters its morning star phase, also known as its eastern or oriental phase. It's direct, moving quickly, and rises before the Sun. It's very strong. At around the 60-degree mark, a sextile from the Sun, its strength is pronounced, and it remains strong until about 120 degrees ahead of the Sun. At this point, however, it begins to slow down and makes its first retrograde station. A planet within 7 days of a station is considered strong. Its qualities are intensified, as if it's rushing to get things done before the retrograde begins. Next, the planet enters its eastern retrograde phase, moving toward the opposition with the Sun. This is a weakening phase. The qualities of retrograde, repetition, delays, rebelliousness, and reversals are all in effect. As it approaches opposition, the planet speeds up in its retrograde motion and is especially close to the Earth, making its effects more pronounced. Around this phase, it may enter a period of curtailed passage, when it disappears from the sky. This lack of visibility adds confusion to the planet's already retrograde condition, making it especially weak and disoriented. After the opposition, the superior planet moves into its western retrograde phase. The planet begins to slow its retrograde motion and remains weak, but at about 120 degrees behind the Sun, it makes its second station, the direct station. If a planet is within 7 days of this direct station, it is very strong, as if it's recovered from a serious illness and is now determined to resume its action and move towards its goals. From there, the planet enters its western direct phase, moving forward through the zodiac again. It gains speed, and it's strong until about 90 degrees behind the Sun. From then, it progressively weakens, moving back under the beams at 15 degrees from the Sun, then into combustion, and finally back to Cazimi, where the cycle begins again. The synodic cycle of the inferior planets, specifically Mercury and Venus, begins differently. It starts at the inferior conjunction, when the planet is moving backwards and has entered Cazimi with the Sun. Though it's retrograde, it is very strong for a moment, but then it zooms out of Cazimi and into combustion, moving fast, but backwards. In this phase, it is weak, excitable, and prone to acting irrationally. Once the planet exits the combustion zone, it remains under the beams until 15 degrees from the Sun. It's still weak, but beginning to recover. It will then make its heliacal rising on the eastern horizon, becoming visible for the first time after its period of invisibility. From there, it enters its eastern phase. Even as it slows, its distance from the Sun is increasing, and it will soon reach its first direct station. An inferior planet making its first direct station within 7 days of a native's birth is especially strong in their chart. We'll see an example of this later. It's important to note that the direct station and the heliacal rising of an inferior planet, especially Mercury, can occur very close together, making them difficult to distinguish without using astrology software. In practice, simply observing the planet emerging from under the Sun's rays in the morning sky is sufficient to assess its strength. After its first direct station, the planet picks up speed again and moves directly away from the Sun. Its distance from the Sun grows, and it is very strong. However, it will eventually start to sink back toward the Sun again, becoming weaker. Once it enters the Sun's rays, it is no longer visible in the eastern sky, and it moves backwards into combustion before reaching Cazimi, this time at the Superior conjunction. This is a very strong phase for the planet. After the Superior conjunction, the planet will separate from the Sun and pass back through combustion and under the beams until it clears 15 degrees. Then, it will begin to appear in the western sky at sunset, its evening rising phase. The evening rising phase is a position of strength and is particularly important for Venus as a nocturnal planet. The planet is now moving quickly in the western sky and is clearly visible after sunset. It will continue moving ahead of the Sun until it slows to its second retrograde station. Again, a planet within 7 days of the evening rising or the second retrograde station has extra strength and focus in a birth chart. After the second retrograde station, the planet accelerates in retrograde motion and sinks back toward the Sun, moving from visibility into invisibility through combustion and back to Cazimi, where the whole cycle begins again. Now, let's put things into practice by looking at examples from our favorite charts from history. This way, we can see how the solar phase affects the strength and significations of specific planets. In Petrarch's birth chart, Mercury is within 17 minutes of the Sun. It's fully in Cazimi, by any definition. This places Mercury right beside the solar king on his throne. A look at Petrarch's life illustrates this vividly. In September 1340, he received simultaneous invitations to be crowned poet laureate at the University of Paris and in Rome. Choosing Rome, he visited King Robert of Naples, who subjected him to a 3-day oral examination and declared him qualified for the post. On April 8, 1341, King Robert crowned Petrarch poet laureate and declared him a Roman citizen at the senatorial palace. This is only the second instance of the honor being bestowed in Rome since classical antiquity. Petrarch's coronation oration, delivered that day, is considered by many to be the first manifesto of the Renaissance. Here, you can see the Cazimi planet in action. Mercury is seated beside the king, giving royal recognition and speaking with the full authority of the throne. Tilak's chart offers another Cazimi example. In his chart, Venus is within 1 degree of the Sun, Cazimi by the Hellenistic standard. This significantly boosts Venus's strength, placing it together with the Sun in a position of power. Tilak sought to unite Indians all across the country by founding the 10-day Ganesh festival. It saw massive participation across Western India and quickly spread to be popular throughout the country. It is still celebrated today. This is a Cazimi Venus at work. You see the party leader and social organizer seated beside the king, bringing about large-scale cultural change. The sign Leo lends the whole affair an additional quality of grandeur and popular appeal. Unfortunately, not all planets in Tilak's chart are equally well situated by solar phase. Mercury is within 15 degrees of the Sun in the sign of Cancer, placing it under the beams. In our earlier lessons on the houses, we saw how Tilak's Mercury in the 12th house signified a young prince, by the name of Shivaji VI. He was maltreated, declared insane, and imprisoned in a fort by the British. The fact that Mercury is also under the Sun's beams, moving from visibility into invisibility, adds to the weakness and concealment that surrounds this planet's significations. The additional strain of being under the rays contributes to the young prince's deteriorating health and eventually his untimely death. Copernicus also has Mercury under the beams, just around the 15-degree mark in the sign of Pisces. His Mercury is in detriment in Pisces, but it is located in the favorable 7th house, which provides some mitigation. Importantly, Mercury is moving away from the Sun rather than toward it, which means it is recovering strength rather than losing strength. It is in fact approaching its heliacal evening rising. This means it will soon become visible on the western horizon at sunset. In a previous lesson, we talked about how Saturn in Gemini in Copernicus's chart reflected the immense delays that he experienced in publishing his heliocentric theory. But what helped him bring his work to light? His friends. Two friends in particular, whose names I'm absolutely going to butcher now. You have George Joachim Redicus, a Wittenberg mathematician, and Tiedemann Geza, a close confidant that he wrote letters to. Redicus traveled from Nuremberg to visit Copernicus in May 1539. Copernicus gave him access to the manuscripts, and Redicus wrote an introductory summary called Narratio Prima. This summary was published in 1540. It was well received and generated significant demand for the full work. Eventually, Geza convinced Copernicus to allow publication, and in early 1543, the full text of his heliocentric theory was printed by Johannes Petrius in Nuremberg. Mispronunciations aside, Mercury in the 7th house of partnerships, emerging from under the sun's rays and becoming visible in the western sky, is like a friend or partner, pushing the life's work of Copernicus into the light. The symbolism is remarkably apt. We've already discussed Jupiter in Dickens' chart in some detail. It's the greater benefic, and despite being in detriment in Gemini, its placement in the favorable 10th house helped Dickens to establish a successful and prolific literary career. However, it was not all fun and games. Jupiter is in retrograde in his chart. This introduces themes of rebelliousness, defiance, and repetition. And in Gemini, the sign of writing and publishing, retrograde Jupiter is a symbol for plagiarism and the pirating of written work. This is exactly what happened to Dickens. His works were very popular, so much so that they were frequently copied and printed by unauthorized publishers. With no copyright law in place, his profits were regularly undercut. The most notorious case involved the press baron Edward Lloyd, who produced cheap imitations of Dickens' novels. Dickens took the matter to court, and while his efforts would later result in copyright laws, he lost the case. Here we see how the essential debility of the planet, combined with a difficult solar phase condition, produces a specific and recurring theme in a native's life. In Copernicus's chart, Mars is moving out of the sun's rays and making its heliacal rising in the eastern sky. This is one of the most powerful phases in the Synodic Cycle, comparable to a planet being reborn. We discussed earlier how Mars in its own bound in the 6th house gave Copernicus the local authority to organize and lead the defenses at Allenstein against the Teutonic Knights. The planet's strong solar phase, being at the heliacal rising, adds even further strength to the picture, lending Mars vitality and directness as it emerges from under the sun's rays and is operating at full force. Saturn's solar phase in Petrarch's chart also lends additional support. In our previous lesson, we talked about how Saturn in Libra helped Petrarch to revive classical learning through his translations of Cicero. Saturn here is western and direct, visible in the evening sky. It's positioned around a sextile from the Sun, which gives it a mediocre but reasonably solid strength in terms of solar phase. It's an additional layer of support for a planet already well situated by essential dignity. We can summarize the overall logic of solar phase as follows. The best solar phase condition for a planet is when it's visible, direct, and moving quickly. Depending on its sect, a planet may also prefer its morning or evening phase. The worst solar phase condition is when a planet is invisible, retrograde, and moving slowly. Being combust or retrograde are serious debilities, but remember that a planet in its chariot, that is, a planet in its domicile, exaltation, triplicity, or bound, is protected from the worst effects of combustion. Several conditions will give a planet exceptional strength by solar phase. If it's within 7 days of a station, if it's in Cazimi, if it's making an heliacal or evening rising. These are all intensifying or revitalizing conditions that elevate the planet's capacity to act. Here's the grading system that we use at Satya Astrology for solar phase. As with all grading systems, consider it as a guide. You can adjust it as you like to fit your own practice. When grading superior planets, Cazimi within 17 minutes of the Sun is an A+, within 1 degree is A. Eastern and Combust is a D+, Eastern under the rays is a C+. Heliacal rising within 7 days is an A+. Eastern between heliacal rising and waxing sextile is an A. Eastern waxing sextile to square is a B+. Eastern between the square and first station is a B. Within 7 days of a first retrograde station is an A. Retrograde to a chronicle rising is a C. Within 7 days of a chronicle rising is a B+. Curtailed passage is a C. And the C grade continues through the second direct station. If it's within 7 days of a direct station, it gets an A+. Between the second station and a waning square is a B+. Between a waning square and sextile is a B. Western, between sextile and setting, is a C. Under the rays is a D+, and Combust is a D. For inferior planets, meanwhile, retrograde Cazimi within 17 minutes is an A. Retrograde and Cazimi within 1 degree is a B. Retrograde and Combust is a D. Retrograde and under the rays is a C. Being within 7 days of heliacal rising is an A. Heliacal rising to the first direct station is an A. Being within 7 days of a first direct station is A+. The first station to setting is a B+. Being direct and under the rays is a C. Direct and Combust is a D. Direct conjunction within 17 minutes is an A+. Within 1 degree is an A. Being Combust after the superior conjunction is a D+. Being under the rays after a superior conjunction is a C+. Being within 7 days of evening rising is an A+. Evening rising to second retrograde station is an A. Being within 7 days of a second retrograde station is an A. Between the second station and setting is a B. Under the rays of and moving retrograde is C. And Combust retrograde is a D. We can now apply the system and everything we've learned to the charts of Charles Dickens and Tilak. First, with Dickens, among the superior planets, Saturn is eastern, between heliacal rising and a waxing sextile, giving it a solar phase grade of A. Jupiter is western and in curtailed passage, giving it a C. Mars is western, between the sextile and setting, and also receiving a C. Among the inferior planets, Venus is western, between its evening rising and the second retrograde station, giving it an A grade. Mercury is eastern, between the first station and setting, and moving direct, so it gets a B+. In summary, Saturn and Venus are the strongest in terms of solar phase in Dickens' chart. Mercury is also in reasonably good condition. Jupiter and Mars, however, are the weakest by solar phase. Now, looking at Tilak's chart, we can see the superior planets. Saturn is within 7 days of its heliacal rising, giving it an excellent A+. Jupiter is eastern and within 7 days of its first retrograde station, giving it an A. Mars is western, between the waning square and sextile, giving it a B. For the inferior planets, Venus is Cazimi, within 1 degree of the Sun, giving it an A. Mercury is direct and under the rays, giving it a C. Overall, most of the planets in Tilak's chart are strong in terms of solar phase, with only Mercury standing out as significantly weakened. That wraps up our lesson on solar phase. It's a lesser known but genuinely important dimension of planetary condition in traditional astrology. Combine it with essential dignity and sect, and you get a much more precise picture of how any given planet operates in your birth chart. Here's something to try before our next lesson. Pull up your own birth chart and pick a planet. Is it visible or invisible? Is it moving direct or retrograde? Is it anywhere near the sun? Perhaps under the beams, Combust, or even Cazimi? Based on what we covered today, what grade would you give it in terms of solar phase? Go ahead and include your answer in the comments below. I'd love to see what you find, and it's a great way to start building familiarity with the system of solar phase. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.